If you are thinking, gosh, I would really love more from the materials, I want to know more, I want to do more with my materials, then do stay, because there's one more thing that I want to talk about, which is material instances. If you're not interested in material instances, then I will see you in the next video. If you are, stick around and we'll cover those as well. So at the moment, what I've been doing to change any feature in this material is open the material graph, click on the thing I want to change. So let's say we wanted to change this type of grass that we had. I'm going to open the material graph, choose a different type of grass, the wild grass. Yeah, let's go with that one. And select the relevant textures. I'll hit this, select this texture object, drag in the wild grass, make sure to change the normal as well, and then hit save. And then that whole material rebuilds and it updates the textures on our material. That is the process for changing things on a single material. So this material has all of its values kind of built into this graph. And if you want to change any of these values, you have to change the graph itself. But there is another way of using materials, or a more efficient way of using materials. And that's called instancing. In instancing, what you do is you set up most of the parameters that you want in the material graph, and then you keep a couple of them what's called exposed as variables. So some of them you can change in a different window. So the material itself builds, and you save it, and then you forget about it, and you go to a separate window, and you can start playing around with those parameters. And it's a lot quicker of a way to start iterating with materials. And it also solves the question, okay, so I've set up this material, and it works for this landscape, but what if I want another landscape with different textures, but otherwise it's the same material? We've spent so long sort of setting up this graph. I don't want to set up the whole graph again for another material. And it also seems kind of stupid to duplicate the whole material and use it for a separate landscape. So let's say we create one landscape which is grassy, and then another one which is snowy. Do I need to have two separate materials? The answer is sort of, but you can have them both derive from this one single graph. So to show the general principles of that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these two textures. First of all, let's create a texture object. So this is what the texture object is for. It's for creating material instances. I'll create a texture object and make sure that I have the correct wild grass normal applied. Great, so I'm using a texture object for the dark grass color, and I'm using a texture object for the dark grass normal. So let's hit save on that, and nothing's changed. The material is exactly the same as it was before. But now I'm going to right-click on the texture object and say convert to parameter. And I'll call this dark grass color. Or in fact, I'm going to be a little bit clever about this, because I've said what if one is dark grass and one is snow. So I'm going to call this layer 1 color. I'm going to call this one, I'll do the same, right-click on that, convert to parameter, layer 1 normal. And interestingly enough, because I converted it to a parameter, it's reset the texture to the default texture. So that's annoying, but I'm going to have to just find that grass again. It's normal, so we've got the color and then the normal. And save. And again, nothing has changed on the texture. I mean, the material. So this is exactly the same as it was before, except what we can do now is take the material, right-click on it, and right at the top, so this is something that you do a lot because it's at the top of this menu, there's an option to create material instance. So this is going to create a new material, and the name is called, if we just click on it, and can you guys see that? Yes, okay, good. It's visible. So M landscape layer inst, I-N-S-T. So it's the same name as the other material, except it's got this underscore inst afterwards, which stands for instance. And if you click on this, you open up something kind of like the material graph. You can see the object over here, but it doesn't have the actual graph on it. So this is the original with the graph, and this is the instance. In the top right of this window, you can see that there are two options called layer 1 color and layer 1 normal. These are the parameters that we exposed to this instance. So this instance can take, if you check those two checkboxes, what this instance can do is allow you to change this texture without changing the actual material. So at the moment, if I change the texture, nothing happens. If I just save that, nothing happens, because the original material is still applied. But if I was to go back to our material, our landscape, words are meaningless. And under the material slot, instead of adding the landscape layer, we add the instance. They look kind of the same, except one is like a little bit darker. Right, what's happened now is that we can change the texture really, really quickly and really, really easily. So let's say I wanted to go back to my clover grass. I just need to change these two variables. I don't have to resave the material. I don't have to rebuild this material. I'm doing nothing in the graph or anything like that. And this instance is all the differences are saved within this instance. And this is super powerful because you can create another instance. This is called inst1. Open this one up and change these parameters to, I don't have snow, but let's brick, sure. One of the defaults is just brick. And the reason this is super helpful is because I could then call this, instead of landscape layer, I could call this M landscape layer double L brick, and call this one M double L grass. And now I have two separate materials that derive from the same material. So they're all built off this main graph. So all of the blending is sorted out, all of the normals, all the roughness, all of that. And the only thing that I need to worry about in these two instances is what the texture is. And if you did that same texture parameterizing, so if you went back into the main material and you created parameters from all of these texture objects, anyway, you get the point. I'm not going to actually do it. But if you created parameters for the color of layer 2 and the color of layer 3 and the color of layer 4, that means that you can then have multiple different landscape materials with multiple different textures on them for each different landscape of your project. So if you plan to do that, if you plan to create different landscapes throughout this course, maybe one's grassy, one's rocky, one's desert, you can create one landscape layer material now for the rest of your class and for the rest of your projects, really, and just create a new instance of that layer, of that material, every time you want to create a new material for a new landscape. So I hope that makes sense, and that's kind of what I do whenever I have a project with multiple experiments or explorations. I'll create one main material and create instances of that material every time I need something new. That's basically the same at its core. And I will just add that I only parameterized the color and the normal just for expediency in this video, but you could totally add as many parameters as you want. So you could make the specular and roughness parameter. Actually, let's do that. If you've come this far, then you might as well take one step further, which is converted parameter. We'll call this layer 1 spec. Converted parameter layer 1 rough. Hit save on that. And now the other feature of the instancing is that if you take your grass instance which is the one that's currently applied to the landscape, and you activate the roughness and the specular, now you can begin to, in real time, so whereas before you'd have to save and wait for it to upload and compile, this time in real time you can see the differences between roughness and specularity and what they do. So if you are trying to kind of explore and see what the different parameters do, instancing is a great way to be able to do that and see the updates in real time. So we can see if I set my specular to 0, there's no specularity with like a low roughness. But then as we increase the specular, we get this really shiny object. But then if we increase the roughness, then it's still shiny, but it's kind of like the shininess is dispersed a little bit more. All sorts of goodness like that. Okay, now I'm done. This has been a much longer video than I anticipated and than I expected, so I apologize about that. But materials are always gnarly, so if you've come this far, then congratulations and also commiserations. Please let me know if you have any questions or troubles or concerns in the class help page. The next video, I promise, will be a lot more brief, and we'll get to the good stuff of populating your scene with assets pretty soon. For the moment, though, I encourage you to explore the landscape tool a little bit more. Create your materials, browse Quixel, download some different surfaces and see what they are like in your project. And just have fun with the material graph. It can be a really fun place to explore different looks and concepts for your scene. Okay, I will see you in the next video. Until then, take care.